Mika Whaihui.
E te māngai te whare, tēnā puia, e ngā member o te whare nei, tēnā tātou katoa. Mr Speaker, it is indeed my privilege and honour to participate in the third reading of the Papawai and Kaikokirikiri Trust Amendment Bill. And if there's any particular part in this House that I think as politicians that we enjoy the most, it's always the third reading, sir. And this is a non-controversial bill that Labour support wholeheartedly. Sir, the intent of the bill is, like the member who's just resumed his seat, is to modernise the Papawai and Kaikokirikiri Trust board in terms of the original intent of why it's been set out, and I guess to modernise it in today's context. So I just want to touch briefly on the 4 objectives that the Trust attempted to do and that the Select Committee addressed. The first objective was to describe better the relationship between Papawai and Kaikokirikiri Trust Board, the Bishop of Te Upoko o Te Ika, the tangata whenua of Wairarapa. That was objective 1. Objective 2 was to establish a more robust nomination process of board members. Objective 3, to provide a fairer distribution of funds for tangata whenua o Wairarapa. And 4th was to facilitate a long-term development of their lands. And so when you look into the bill, those 2 front-end objectives, i.e. the relationships and the nomination process, is explained further in the bill, in that once upon a time they had 10 members appointed through various mechanisms. Under this bill, it's 8 members that will be appointed. 4 will be made up from the 4 members from the Bishop, and as the bill says, the bill provides the board must have 8 members, consisting 4 that are appointed by the Bishop of Te Upoko Te Ika. And just so that we have no ambiguity on that, we're talking about the Bishop as defined, appointed under the title by the Anglican Church in Aotearoa, New Zealand and Polynesia, commonly known as the Church of England, or the Bishop of any replacement diocesan. And of course, sir, where the rubber hits the road in terms of empowering the tangata whenua Wairarapa, they get to choose the other 4 members of the board and advertise the process in which they're going to follow, sir, in a public way. So those 2 objectives, if that was the intention of the Trust, I believe have been met. And of course, the 3rd objective around the fair distribution of funds, sir, to say that the Trust will apply its funding and no longer limits distribution just to Anglican church schools. Can I just pause there? As an Anglican myself, and also to the iconic Māori boarding Anglican schools that this Trust has helped. And I want to acknowledge that. Queen Victoria, Tipene, St Stephen's, who unfortunately both closed, Hokarere in my electorate, and of course Te Aute. So these are iconic Māori boarding schools, and I know the Trust, along with many other educational trusts, were instrumental in supporting many people. So I just want to acknowledge the contribution of the Trust in terms of schooling many of our secondary students, sir. And the 4th objective I just want to comment briefly on is to facilitate the long-term development of lands. And insofar as the Act goes, it covers that the bill may sell, or sorry, the board may sell the Clearville land, but not the Papawai land or Kaikokirikiri land. In our previous contributions, obviously the Corpius land, which is the Papawai land, we want to make sure that that's protected, and it is done that under this bill. But in terms of the Clearville land, giving the Trust Board more flexibility to make decisions around how that's either leased or managed or sold on, I think that's a good compromise, so we support that. And to avoid any doubt, it says again in the bill, to avoid doubt, the board may not consent to the sale or otherwise permanent alienation of the Papawai land or the Kaikokirikiri land. And so that's, again, a very important aspect of the bill, sir. So those are the four objectives that the Trust, I understand, sought in presenting it to the member of Wairarapa. I do want to just quickly note that the Trust, I do believe, wanted the bill presented in both languages. We've transversed that issue. It just wasn't enough time, but it's unfortunately a commitment, and I want to acknowledge my colleague Nanaya during the committee stage mentioned that if we are going to move down that track, and I do hope this House considers that seriously, sir, that we do plan for it through PCO, because I think it's timely that we are actually acknowledging the three official languages in this country, but particularly for Māori and English to set aside, sir. Sir, I want to just move to the acknowledgements. To the member who's brought this bill to the House, Alistair Scott, ngā mihi kia koe. Thank you very much for bringing this member's bill to the House and for the commitment that you have obviously presented in terms of supporting this particular trust that sits in our electorate. So ngā mihi kia koe. I want to also acknowledge the hard-working Māori Affairs Select Committee, ably chaired by Tū Te Haunuku Korako. Thank you very much for the work that you've done and all the members of the Māori Affairs Select Committee. The submitters, sir, and at this point I do want to acknowledge Rangitane Tū Mai Rā Trust, who again in their submission talked about the use of te reo, and also ensuring that the whakapapa to Wairarapa was also adequately recognised in the bill, and I do believe that that's been achieved. Fourthly, sir, during the committee stage, I want to acknowledge the Labour members who contributed, and it was interesting reading their contributions to that committee stage. I know there were some issues that my colleague Peony Henare talked about in terms of the reo, whether it was correct or not, and rightly so, Mr Chair, you reminded him this wasn't the time to address it, but it's a timely reminder of us that accuracy around the use of te reo needs to be managed and observed much more closer, sir. And of course, again, reiterating the point made by the Trust around te reo, and I've made that point, sir. I guess, in closing my comment to the Trust, who I know may be in the gallery, I want to acknowledge them, sir, both the current trustees, plus all the previous Trust Board members who may not longer be with us, who have served gallantly the original intent of the Act, but more importantly, sir, the absolute financial contribution to hundreds, if not thousands of Māori around this country that enabled them to attend those schools. And on a personal note, sir, my mother attended Hokariri in the late 1940s, 1948-49, finished in Hokariri in 1953. I mentioned this particular bill when I was back home with her recently, and she recalled receiving financial assistance back in those days to attend Hokariri. So just from me to the Trust, I want to make that acknowledgement. I also want to acknowledge the Trust and thank the Trust who also contributed to the education of my two sons who went to Lindisfarne. And so I just want to acknowledge, not an Anglican school, I must admit, a Presbyterian school, but from me, it's important to acknowledge those that help our people further their aspirations and their dreams of good quality education. So, sir, just on that closing note, again, I want to thank the Trust. I want to thank the member for bringing this bill to the House. It is, what we've said, a very non-controversial bill. Labour supports all legislation that empowers people, that do really wonderful things in our community, and the Papawai Kaikokirikiri Trust has shown that they have done it for many years, and the passing of this bill to modernise them will ensure that service to our people in the Wairarapa particularly will continue. I commend this bill to the House.
Papawai.